Aaron, when you transitioned from primarily technical roles into leadership, obviously now you're more at a regional leadership level, but just leadership in general, was there kind of a mindset shift that you had to go through or something you needed to change to kind of think more about leadership and remove yourself from some of the technical aspects of projects?
As a project manager, you're really trying to stay in front of the technical issues on a project,
Mhm.
whereas the leadership requires a lot more nimbleness. You don't really know what you're going to necessarily be walking into. My day now, I could think is going to be, A, B, and C, and you really have to be nimble to understand that, you're going to go with whatever flows in the day and handle those issues. I will say there's one.
Going from technical professional to leader is extremely challenging, but there's one thread that you can focus on that can help you throughout your entire career to develop as a strong technical leader. And we're going to talk about that today. In today's episode, I have with me Aaron Lewis. Aaron is a licensed professional engineer. He's an executive principal of Structural Engineering East at Simpson, Gumpertz and Hager, or SGH. Aaron brings experience across civil, geotechnical, and structural engineering, along with executive oversight of multiple offices across major U.S. markets. We're going to talk about the mindset shift from technical expert to regional leader, how you can build a culture around the Seller-Doer model without burning out your technical professionals, and what does some of the things look like when you're really thinking about your people as a leader, because that is a real fundamental thread for you as a leader. So if you're navigating your own leadership growth, you're managing multiple office teams, or you're just thinking about how to really grow your department or organization for the long term, this conversation is for you. Now, before we jump in with Aaron, I do want to tell you about AEC PM Connect, the premier event series for AEC leaders and project managers looking to elevate team performance, lead with purpose, and deliver measurable results. Across multiple locations each year, you'll explore real-world strategies for project delivery, leadership, and technology in all things related to AEC projects. Our next event takes place in New Jersey in June, and then Kansas City in October. You can learn more about AEC PM Connect at aecpmconnect.com. I'm your host, Anthony Pisano, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast. Well, Aaron, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm glad to be here. Really appreciate the time.
We're happy to have you. So let's start out by having you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got started in structural engineering.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to do so. Kind of reflecting back, after many years in the industry, it became clear kind of why I got into it. I grew up on a farm. I grew up on my grandparents' farm, and that kind of instigated the problem solving, and all the time trying to figure out why something's broken, how to fix it, and also kind of ownership of problems and dealing with them. And so reflecting kind of like my childhood is really kind of what drove me to get into engineering. A lot of people think that because you're good in math or good in science, that's the natural engineering approach, pathway. In my case, it was really kind of the problem solving. Both my parents also kind of pushed me that direction. My dad was a surveyor, so akin to the engineering field, and he really got me involved in the technical aspects. Those data collection, field work, pretty young. And similarly, my mom had the business side. I can still actually remember to this day that she showed me kind of like time value of money and amortization stuff. So the business side, I really got from her. So both of them really kind of pushed me in that direction.
That's great. That's great. And surveying is great. I mean, I started off kind of on the surveying side of things before I got into civil engineering and design. And it was really great in that it opened my eyes into, what goes on in the field, which kind of made it easier when I had to design those things, right? I had like a good picture in my head, and that's was a valuable start. But
Yeah, all
so,
projects start with surveying.
yeah,
Like that's the nuts and bolts of a lot of projects, and you get to see a lot of things being built when doing that. And that was my kind of first exposure.
yeah, like you said, it's the data collection piece, right? Gathering all that information. So, Aaron, when you transitioned from primarily technical roles into leadership, obviously now you're more at a regional leadership level, but just leadership in general, Was there a kind of a mindset shift that you had to go through or something you needed to change to kind of think more about leadership and remove yourself from some of the technical aspects of projects?
Yeah, I I definitely think so, although I don't think it was like one day just walking in and saying, "I'm gonna
Right.
flip a light switch." And I think that's the important part of the company is trying to make that be a bit of an evolution as someone migrates from the technical side to, the leadership. And at SGH, even our technical leaders, including myself, at the highest levels are still involved in, the technical direction of projects and leadership of projects. So the good part is we get a little bit of both. But when I moved into more regional leadership, it did require, thinking about how to put good teams together, how to help instigate what motivates people, listen and understand how people work. Because instead of managing a team of 4 or 5, 6 or 7, you're now managing, a region of 200 plus people. And there's a lot of diversity in there. And there's a lot of skill sets that, probably don't come inherently, day one. As a project manager, you're really trying to stay in front of the technical issues on a project.
Mhm.
Whereas the leadership requires a lot more nimbleness. You don't really know what you're going to necessarily be walking into. My day now, I could think is going to be, A, B, and C. And you really have to be nimble to understand that, you're going to go with whatever flows in the day and handle those issues. I will say there's one similarity in my kind of core, though, that I stuck to between the technical side and the regional leadership is the aspect of kind of lifelong learning and instilling that, both in my personal practice, my hobbies, and then, when I was doing work both at the technical side and the regional side, I really tried to focus on the lifelong learning aspects of things.
And just to go a little deeper on that, you mentioned you didn't flip a light switch, which makes sense. But so what did you do? Did you just, I guess you kind of answered it in the end there with the continuous learning. Was it just kind of showing up every day and trying to find the one skill you needed to develop and then work on that a little bit? Or, how did you actually make that transition in terms of skill development?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of listening. One of the first kind of larger leadership roles I got put into was probably about 12 or so years ago. I got put in charge of the Boston division, which was 120 some odd people. And I got put in charge of principals and project managers and staff, some of those principals with decades more experience than me. And, to walk in the room and just expect, everybody to have the trust of you, that wasn't going to happen. So, how do you, in your own way, kind of work through that? And it took probably, a couple years, a lot of face to face time, a lot of working with people, working through problems and working through challenges, so that they can start to learn to trust you. But it wasn't, day one that all flipped. You had to work towards that, and it was, it was hard work. You had to do it over a course of a couple of years.
It's great. Transform your technical experts into impactful leaders with EMI's Engineering Leadership Accelerator. Tailored for AEC professionals, this program enhances communication, delegation, and decision-making skills. Flexible, interactive, and designed to fit your team's schedule. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training. So, Aaron, you mentioned, the Boston office in the beginning, and now, of course, you oversee multiple offices. So, one question I would have for you around that is, how do you create alignment and accountability when you have these different teams and different markets that you're overseeing, trying to build some consistency into your leadership philosophy and your leadership practices?
Yeah, we have multiple offices, multiple locations, and one of the things I see is that each of those has its own what I would call micro culture. And I think they embody the SGH core value culture, which gets instilled at the divisional level. But you have to work with kind of those little micro cultures. You don't want to overwrite those. You want to understand them and you want to leverage them, and you want to gain the benefit of those. And it's really interesting to watch when you go to each of the offices and each of the divisions. You can see how their little micro subcultures kind of develop and creates some strength within their individual teams that that they have them. Strong local leadership is really key and critical. The division heads and the ones that kind of are there on the day-to-day basis and to instill the core values, the things that we think are important are really important. I mean, someone like me as a region head that travels there, occasionally or something can only have so much, impact on the day-to-day activities. It's really gaining the alignment through the next layer that is on the front lines and there to push us in the right direction. At our company, we have a number of principals that really are in charge of getting the work and developing the work and directing it, and trying to make sure that there's touch points regularly to gain alignment there and make sure that we're sharing staff, sharing technical capabilities are all important. So every week we run a meeting where we make sure those principals and directors come together to make sure we have those touch points across the entire region.
That's great. I love that. I really love that you talked about kind of the subculture. I think that's really important. I mean, we see this a lot. If you have like a 2,000 person engineering company that maybe even acquires, right? Like a smaller, like 100-person, 50-person firm, you don't want to completely strip that culture away, right? I mean, I think it's good to have an overarching culture, of course, but allowing some of these subcultures to breathe and exist, even like you're speaking about within an organization as well, I think can be really powerful in terms of the vibe in that office or that team. I think the word culture comes up a lot here on the podcast, and I always like to, I think I heard it described once and I really liked it. It was, how people feel about coming to work every day, you know?
Yeah, no,
And
that's exactly right. And,
yeah,
there's certain things that from your corporate culture that are, must haves. And, every company kind of has those. So those are certain things that are, expected. But then there's little things that each of those offices you can see develops over time. And it's really interesting to kind of see those. And it's what makes them kind of feel as a team and as a group and a very successful group. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So Aaron, you mentioned before developing business, and I want to go there for a minute. A lot of organizations in the AEC industry operate under the seller-doer model, right? Where the architects, engineers, technical professionals, they're contributing to the technical delivery, but they're also bringing in new business, right? They're managing projects, but they're building relationships that are going to bring in business. And that can create some tension, right? Because, again, it's another thing you got to do. It's a whole other thing you got to think about. So how can you kind of build a culture where these technical professionals kind of see business development as something that is positive. It's a leadership avenue for them. It's something that's going to really help contribute to their organization as opposed to something that's like a chore that, oh, we got to do this too type of mentality.
Yeah, no, we see that quite a bit. To me, we don't see, at least I don't see business development as selling. To me, it's really about creating the relationships with our clients and our partners, and showing that like we're curious in solving their problems. We want to service them well, and we're solving some of their toughest problems. And it's rewarding when those clients have the trust in us and want to come back to us, either through repeat business or even referring us to other folks. And when you're in a seller-doer model, I think getting exposure to those roles very early is important. And I think if you're a company where all of a sudden you turn a light switch on to flip somebody into a business selling role, that's going to be a challenge. If you build that over, an entire career, that's where it becomes much more, natural. And I wouldn't say anybody here is kind of like in a selling mode. They
Right.
sell because they're respected in the industry and people want to come back to them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the one thing that we do a lot of PM development work here, a lot of PM training, and the one thing we tell project managers a lot is just think of building really good relationships on your projects and delivering great projects, right? And I think a function of those two things typically will result in new business, right? I mean, people typically, if they hire someone to do a job, they do a good job, they're probably going to want to go back to that person again, right? And I think the relationships piece of it is really important. And if you think about cultivating those relationships, and the one thing that we always like to say at EMI is the project ends, but the relationship doesn't end. Right. And that's kind of that mindset of, we got to continue to build relationships. And I think that makes it a little easier than them thinking about they're kind of doing a hard sales or, business development or having to go out and do something else. So that's what I found to be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, building a network early on is important on probably many accounts.
Yeah.
As problem solvers in engineering, you need friends in the industry. You're not going to be able to solve all problems yourself. And so putting teams together, both internally and externally is important, and as well as kind of having those relationships um, with folks to, bring work in becomes important over time. But I really think starting that off very early is helpful. And to me, I go back to, I started off as an intern from Northeastern University, and I still have those relationships that I built during that time period. Somebody came up to me, I met him 30 years ago, and he said hi to me at an ACC event the other day. And it's just maintaining those. It's not a selling thing. It's just creating friends in the industry.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it too. Just creating friends, creating those relationships. So I want to talk a little bit about, cross-disciplinary fluency in engineering. I mean, we have listeners to this show that might be architects, they might be engineers, maybe engineers in different disciplines. In our case, we happen to both have a background in civil engineering, which has a lot of different sub-disciplines. And so when you're kind of a leader, let's say in an industry like civil, where you're dealing with civil, geotech, structural, how does, having an education or knowledge in these different disciplines really help as a leader to be able to manage some of the risk and guide some of the strategic decisions and just really lead people? How helpful is that for you?
Yeah, it's been really helpful for me. Like you mentioned, I've had a cross discipline between geotechnical, structural, and civil. And by having it, really kind of allows you to ask, maybe more in depth or key questions when you get on really complicated projects. And, a typical maybe building project where a geotechnical report is written and, it's given to the structural engineer and there's not a lot of communication, that's kind of, one case. But when you get into something that requires a lot of back and forth and understanding the nuances of what goes into kind of either some analysis or some design, it becomes really, really helpful. And we've structured a team here. We call it the heavy civil team, where, it's not the geotechnical or the structural folks. It's a team that all kind of works together, where you can bounce ideas off of each other. You can understand the basis of an analysis. And it really, really just allows you to take on more complicated things because there's more fluent communication between those lines. It's really allowed me to take on a complex job and ask some of the key questions because you can kind of think across lines.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I always like to use the words like well-rounded, maybe for example, if you're someone who's getting into leadership in the technical professional world, the AEC space, I think it really behooves you to learn a little bit about some of the other sub disciplines that you're going to touch, right? Some of those other services that your team might offer, right? Even within your own team. And I think doing that can really help you as a leader. And I love Aaron's philosophy or the strategy they've used at SGH to build a team of people very specific to having those different capabilities around different project types. And so I think that's definitely something to think about as an up and coming leader. And I think to Aaron's earlier point too, your network again, right, comes into play here, right? I know for me, when I worked in a multidisciplinary firm, knowing the right people in the different technical disciplines was very helpful for me. I mean, I wasn't going to be a geotech expert as a civil engineer, but I had a couple people I could lean on. I could call them, bounce some things off of them, which kind of helped me to be more well-rounded. And then over time, of course, having 15 phone conversations with that person, next time I'm in the field with a client, I may not give them an answer, but I might be able to talk more intelligently about something without having all those people there with me. So I think it's a constant development, but I think the mindset of being a little bit more well-rounded can really help you and serve you. And in today's world, honestly, you have so much information at your fingertips, right? Through the internet, through podcasts, through YouTube, you can really learn and brush up on some different topics ahead of a meeting or ahead of a project. But I do think that that internal network of professionals that you can lean on is really helpful for you to build as a leader in this industry for sure.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right.
So, Aaron, when we think about building leaders in AEC organizations like SGH, can you talk a little bit about internship programs and how they can really be utilized to develop not just your future technical professionals, but your future leaders? What experience have you had with that or have you seen with that?
Yeah, I've been, a real strong proponent of the internship program. I came out of one. At Northeastern had an internship program that I participated in. It helped kind of build my foundation of, what I was able to do and accomplish very early on. I think most importantly, though, it's a two-way street. It's a win-win. So I think the employee as an intern gets a lot of great exposure and experience. Maybe it's their first real kind of professional job. It allows them to really kind of put some thinking about where the rest of their career is gonna go. And from an employer point of view, it's a strong pipeline of really good technical, folks to bring in. And when you're a larger company, you got to try to do a number of hires each year, and it really helps us. It really helps inject kind of the culture very early on. And so we want to make sure there's a cultural fit there between the long-term employees and the company. And when the intern comes in, they get that right away, and you can see whether there's a strong fit or not. And it helps with one of the things we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve a hire that will stay with the company 30 or 40 years, which is a real tough thing to do. We're trying to hire for a career, and it really helps with trying to boost the chances of that success, that is a good match. It also really it really benefits kind of the ability to bring folks in with a high hit rate. We had, out of all the offers we put together over, I think it was like a 5 or 6 year period in my region, 100% of the interns that we gave offers to accepted full-time positions. And so that just shows you kind of like the ability to really turn them into long-term hires for us without going through a hiring process where you interview, maybe 5 people for one spot or something like that. The efficiency is very strong.
It's a pretty good hit rate, 100%.
Yeah, I think there was one person that did not, and because they changed their course of study, or they weren't going to continue engineering or something.
That's great. No, I think it's great. And I think the one way I think about this a lot is I'm a big sports fan. And I always think that when you look at some of these teams that are successful over long periods of time, they usually have a really good prospect system, right? They really develop their minor leagues. They know how to develop players. Whereas, these teams that maybe are these one-hit wonders, they win a championship and then they don't win another one for 10, 15 years. It's because maybe they signed a bunch of people, brought them in, but they really didn't develop people long-term. And I think the internship program really gives you that opportunity for organic growth and developing people, bringing them up in your values, right? Within your systems that you utilize there, gets people comfortable with that. And I think it's a real kind of advantage, almost like a secret advantage for firms if you could do it well. And I think it's hard to do well, which is why a lot of people can't do it, because you're really building up, like you said, that trust with people, which is why you have such a high rate, of course, of people that convert to long-term professionals from the intern program. So I think it's great. And if you're looking for ways out there to maybe grow your organization more organically, I guess I should say, I think the intern program is a definite way to go if you can invest in that.
Yeah, I like the analogy a lot. One of the things that we try to do is create relationships with the universities and schools where we attract a lot of the interns from, and that's paid off tremendously.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So another question that I want to ask you about is we work in this technically demanding environment, of course, where people are very structured. We've got day-to-day routines, we have project milestones and pressures that we all deal with. But at the same time, we're all trying to be innovative, right? Forward thinking these days. There's new tools, there's new technologies, there's new trends out there. How can you balance those two things where, I've got to be technically efficient, I've got to hit my milestones, I want to keep doing the things I know how to do, but at the same time, I can't keep my head down to the point where I'm missing these other opportunities. How do you balance that as a leader?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's sometimes a hard thing to do because you have deadlines on projects, and that becomes kind of the first and foremost thing that's on your mind. I do think taking a step back, every so often, maybe even on a daily basis, and just thinking about the long-term view. To me, executing projects, that's important. That's what keeps the lights on, the business running. But really, the foundation of all of that is the staff and the people that you develop. And so when someone's here for a career of 30 to 40 years, maybe even longer, we just celebrated some folks with 50-year careers here. It's really the long-term view. Can you develop them as a person, their capabilities? And if you focus on that, the project work will kind of come along. I mean, it's not to say you can't keep, an eye on deadlines and other things, but trying to look people's, goals. What are they trying to achieve personally, and making sure that you're getting them experience and exposure to make sure they can kind of grow as a person within the organization. SGH certainly did that with me, and I'd like to think that we do that with everybody within the company. And to me, that development of them really kind of compounds as you develop people to be able to do more, take on more challenging things. They'll be able to train others that are coming in underneath them. And I'd say the other thing is sharing the innovations is kind of another aspect that I think sometimes gets missed. A lot of things happen grassroots on projects. And so making sure there's forums and places for people can kind of share some of that innovation that's happening, not at the corporate level, but as folks doing project work. And I can remember a lot of examples of me coming through the system where we did something new, and you try to share that with other folks so that they could benefit from it too as well. You just need a place for that to happen.
Yeah, that's great. Creating that avenue, that's important. All right, so I got two last questions for you, Aaron, kind of bigger picture questions before we wrap up here. The first one is when you think about the long-term kind of organizational sustainability for organizations in the AEC industry, what are some of the leadership decisions that they're making today that are going to have kind of the biggest impact in the next 5 to 10 years from what you're seeing out there?
It kind of builds on the last one. It's really around the training and development of, those next generation that's coming in. And, it's a continual thing that needs to be focused on. In hindsight, 5 to 10 years goes incredibly fast. And so if you wait for that, you'd be too late. So, to me, the training development's really the business strategy. I don't see it as overhead. Yes, it is. All the CFOs would, say that is. But to me, that's the investment that you're making in that future, and probably the most important decision that you're going to make. At SGH, we have a team that's completely dedicated and helps supporting us doing things like that. We call it technical development, our training and development team, and shows and demonstrates how important we think that is. An internal perspective, succession planning, it's a process, not an event like we just talked about. And I think that, from an external, point of view, for sustainability, diversifying your clients and project types is probably pretty important. We'll go through cycles, um, you know, undoubtedly, through someone's career. And so making sure that there's some redundancy there so that you can shift and move into other areas as maybe, let's say, the office market goes down and, maybe Department of Energy or other type of work kind of increases.
Yeah, and I think that that's your answer really is kind of providing a summary or a trend that we've been talking about today, which is the development of people, right? I mean, we talked about the internship program, right? We talked about the culture, the subculture, which is really representative of that team and those people and how you're developing that. And, we talked about just straight out some of your programming to develop your people. So I think that that's such a huge, again, another one of those kind of maybe underrated advantages that an organization can have is your ability to really develop talent, because it's one thing to be able to hire someone, but it's another thing to be able to develop them and retain them and keep them there, like you said earlier, for the long term. And hopefully you're hiring someone for the next 30, 40 years. And I absolutely think development, I don't think, I know from all the work that we do is that, people can get jobs in our industry today. They're available. But the question is, they're thinking about how is this company going to develop me and create career pathways and opportunities for me? And I think that that's something that you really need to be able to present to someone when you're trying to grow your organization. And those that work there now, you need to continue to talk to that about with them and show them that pathway that continues to exist or unfold for them, if you will. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, constantly having the long-term view is allows for that to occur.
Absolutely. All right. So, Aaron, the last question I have for you is just based on your leadership experience to date in your career. What is maybe one piece of advice you might give to an up and coming leader, just, ready to take on a new leadership assignment, ready to take on a new team, ready to take on a new leadership role in their organization, coming from that technical professional background? What is maybe one piece of advice you might give to them to develop as a leader from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of what we said right at the end of that last question. It's like really thinking about the long term. You can get caught up in kind of the big emergency or the big, theme of the day or thing that's going on. You want to have kind of a plan on how to develop your team and people. And really, thinking about the long term, because if you're constantly making decisions towards that, you're hedging your bet all the time towards a really strong and successful team, and that undoubtedly will play out well for you.
Good stuff. Once again, he is Aaron Lewis, licensed professional engineer, executive principal, structural engineering East at SGH. Aaron, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. Glad to be here.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Aaron. We talked about a lot of interesting stuff, but that one thread of developing your people is something that I think is so critical to becoming a very strong, successful technical leader and growing a technical organization. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this for AEC professionals on a weekly basis to help you become better project managers and better leaders. I'll see you next week.